Great. Good evening, everybody. Welcome to the WHO Pandemic and Epidemic Hub, and I really want to thank everybody who just joined us for our open house and who will stay on for our reception. And I also want to thank our online participants. We're live streaming tonight, and this will also be available on our website for full streaming later. So this is our 6th session of our speaker series called The Complexity of Pandemics. And so we are co-hosting this with our colleagues at Charité Center for Global Health, and we want to really appreciate and recognize their support in pulling this together tonight. As you know, there is the ongoing COP28, and for the first time, it's dedicated an entire day to health. And what we're really hoping to do tonight is to build on that momentum and to focus on the interplay between climate change and infectious disease threats. So to do this, what we're going to be doing is exploring how climate change has affected the geographic distribution and behavior of disease vectors. We're going to be discussing the connection between extreme weather events and infectious disease outbreaks. And we're going to be highlighting the shared opportunities and challenges that we face at the global, country, and regional levels. So what we have tonight are 3 scene-setting talks from experts in this field who are going to go through some of their specialist areas, and then we're going to have a video compilation from a number of different speakers who weren't able to join us in person tonight. And then after that, we're going to hold a facilitated panel discussion. So we're really excited that you're here. And as for anybody that's joined us before, we really value partner participation. So we have an online Q&A panel that anybody that's streaming right now, if you haven't been able to find it, it has been sent to you when you registered, so please go have a look for it. And anybody that's here in the audience, there's a QR code that's on the flyer on your seat. If you could have a look at that. Please do submit your questions and answers throughout, and we'll use that at the panel discussion to pull them together so that we can reflect your questions back to the speakers. So with that, I would like to welcome our esteemed host for the evening, who is Dr. Chikwe Akwazu. He is the WHO Assistant Director General who leads the Pandemic Hub here. So Chikwe, if you could please join us to give some opening remarks.
Thank you. Thank you, colleagues. Thanks for coming again. It's unbelievable, our 6th in the series. And thanks for joining us around the house, for those that came a bit earlier. It's just over our 2 years birthday as well. So it's been an incredible journey. This was one of the first initiatives we started, and it's really proud to see the demand continue. We had much more demand than we're able to accommodate this evening, so we had to cut off registration at some point. So we're very grateful for all of you for making it. Before I say a few things about the panel, I want to just call out 2 guys or ask them, Philip, Thibaut, and the rest of the team, Chris. We have these screens and the audio visuals. It's the first time we're using our set of equipment here, so thank you very much for making this happen. You represent so many other people that are very often behind the scenes we don't hear about, but because of them, we have this lovely venue, of course, supported by our colleagues in the Federal Ministry of Health in Germany, some of whom are here. But we're grateful that this venue is coming together. And one of the purposes for the entire hub being here is to kind of be a fulcrum for colleagues to come together, think together, work together in the topics that matter to us. And one of the most important is the complexity of pandemics. And today we'll take a perspective from climate and health. Just this Sunday, a lot of us celebrated that, in a way, celebrated seems too strong a word. But recognize that for the first time in all the COPs, this was the first time health had a specific day to address specific issues that matter to us. I always think about these 2 events, well, not really events, but things happening in the world, the risk of pandemics and the risk of climate change as probably the 2 hardest challenges for our generation to solve, and whether we'll get there or not, we'll see. but at least we have to make some progress on it. But they're very much interconnected with each other. And that's, I think, the perspective many of the discussions we will have this evening. And as we see the expansion of, we just elevated our dengue response to one of the highest levels in the organization. We're working, seeing a resurgence in cholera. None of all these things are interconnected with each other in ways that we're not even fully clear about how they're connected. And that's the type of work this hub is set up to think about, so that the colleagues working in Geneva and our regional offices around the world can focus on the immediate response that has to happen. But here we have the space-time latitude to think about and address some of the longer-term responses, and not doing so on our own. So we'll do so with a collection of partners from academia, from funding organizations, from partner organizations, and think together and use this as an impetus to drive the change that we want to see. So that's all I'll say this evening. I really look forward to the talks myself. I look forward to enjoying them, look forward to sharing a drink with you later. But it's been an honor to co-host this series with the Charité Hospital Group. Really happy that we're able to do this together, share this community, and share the growing global health community in Berlin. So I'll ask my colleague and dear friend, who's probably spent more time on the African continent than in Europe, at least in the last 20 years, I think, Professor Beate Kampmann, to say a few words to welcome you as well. Beate.
Thanks very much. Can you hear me? Oh, yeah. Great. Well, it's so wonderful to see so many people, even at the 6th series. And so my name is Beate Kampmann, and I'm a global health researcher, I guess. I'm a clinician scientist. I'm not an epidemiologist. I'm not a virologist. But I do care deeply about the connection between climate and health. And I think we're in a space where we cannot have any discussion on health without talking about climate. And we cannot have any discussion on climate without talking about health. So that's the way I kind of see it at the moment. I want to give you a few bits of information about why Charité is in this partnership, and we are really delighted to be invited to share this lecture series. I've been in Berlin since January last year. I head the Center for Global Health at the Charité, and Chikwe and I know each other from work in West Africa. I was leading the MRC unit in the Gambia vaccine research for a while, and Chikwe was leading the Africa CDC, and there were many joint up projects and many things we could do together. So it's really lovely to find each other in sort of our home countries, although I guess our souls are in many places. So the partnership with Charité actually started already in 2021. There's an MOU that was signed. This was way before I actually came here. And the first speaker series happened in July 2022. So there's really a track record here already of really exciting topics. And many of you who are here tonight have probably also participated in the previous meetings. I value the link between the surveillance efforts in human, animals and planetary health sector, and this is a fantastic stage to explore these issues and take them to the next step. And clearly the hub has facilitated a great deal of thinking around the open science, the open data, and the platforms that we do need these days to address problems that are local, but they're also regional, and they're finally global. Just talking a little bit about the impact of climate in Germany that we've seen. For example, I also work very closely with Christian Drosten, who heads the Institute for Virology here in Berlin. And Christian's group, and particularly the group in the institute that's looking at arboviruses, has tracked the emergence of West Nile virus in Germany. It was first found in animals in Germany in 2018, and we've had cases in humans since 2019. And this is clearly a disease that is spearheaded by climate change that we're also seeing, because vectors all of a sudden decide to go to places where the climate is more conducive to transmission. And in 2022, we had 19 cases of West Nile virus just in our midst. And we're just starting a project trying to understand the affinity of those viruses for the brain as well. And this is research where Charité can also bring tools to the table, both in the biological sciences as well as in the overall surveillance. We have people working on One Health topics at the Charité, also in the Center of Global Health, which is a very broad church, not only infectious diseases. Those who came by our stand a little bit earlier have seen that we've got a whole number of topics, many related to infection, but not all of them. There is, for example, climate anxiety, which fits into the theme of mental health, mental global health. There is, the waterborne diseases, of course. There's heat stress. We're not just looking at viruses, we're also looking at transmission of waterborne pathogens. And I think in the other C in climate would be conflict for me, because as we know from conflict zones, not only advantaged by climate change, but also by conflict, we see a lot of, potentially evolution of pathogens that are also potentially could be leading to epidemics and pandemics, and it's not just on the climate. Okay, just so the outlook on our partnership, we are expecting to do a lot more things together, and we are delighted to share a community of global health aficionados here in Berlin and beyond. And thank you for everybody online as well. Thank you very much.
Thanks again to Charité for co-hosting us, and to Chikwe for his opening remarks. I just want to also recognize that we have representatives from multiple sectors here with us tonight. The German government, diplomatic missions, we also have academic institutions, international organizations, civil societies, and the private sector. And I think this is a really good picture of why the hub exists, is to be able to bring these different sectors together, different groups that don't necessarily always get to meet, that aren't in the room together, to both learn from each other, as well as to have an opportunity to network and socialize so that we can share these learnings together. So I really appreciate everybody being here. And with that, I'm looking forward to us moving to the first speaker. And if I may introduce Professor Rachel Lowe. She is a professor at the Catalan Institute for Research and Advanced Studies, leading the Global Health Resilience Group at the Barcelona Supercomputing Center. Her research involves co-developing policy-relevant methodological solutions to enhance surveillance, preparedness, and response to climate-sensitive diseases. She has extensive experience in the areas of digital technology, health and climate, including emerging infectious diseases in climate change hotspots. Rachel is a member of the World Meteorological Organization Steering Group for Subseasonal Applications for Agriculture and Environment, as well as the Lancet Commission for Strengthening the Use of Epidemiological Modeling of Emerging and Pandemic and Infectious Diseases. So welcome, Rachel.
Thank you very much for the kind introduction. It's really an honor to be here. So I'm going to share with you today some of the work that we have been conducting to try and understand the links between climate change and health, and think about how we can develop indicators and decision support systems to help users operating in different climate change hotspots across the globe to try and improve preparedness to the emergence of these infectious diseases. So this is just a reminder of the situation we're facing in terms of global temperatures. So this graph is showing us the change in temperatures from the 1850s through to this year. And we can see that the temperatures have been increasing every decade. And this year we have seen record-breaking temperatures. This is partly due to the warming of the climate, which is related to anthropogenic greenhouse gas emissions. And also this year we're seeing an exceptionally warm climate due to the El Nino event that is emerging in the Pacific Ocean. And this has real implications for the emergence, spread, and epidemics of climate-sensitive infectious diseases, we're seeing that the warming of the temperatures is allowing certain parts of the globe to become more climatically suitable for the vectors that spread diseases like dengue and malaria. And we're also seeing changes in weather patterns, and this is leading to more extreme and frequent events that can change the timing and intensity of certain infectious diseases. So we develop indicators that contribute to global initiatives such as the Lancet Countdown, which is a collaboration tracking progress on health and climate change. Just this year, we published a report detailing 47 different indicators tracking different aspects of climate change and health. This here is the malaria indicator, and this graph here that was redrawn by Nature magazine is showing us the areas of the globe that in the 1950s were not climatically suitable for the transmission of malaria parasites, but in the last decade have become climatically suitable. And we're really seeing a northward shift of this suitability, and also we're seeing areas, particularly in the south, in the highland areas, that are becoming more suitable, and this has real implications for communities that have no immunity to these diseases. A couple of years ago, we published a modelling study where we were looking at projecting changes in the length of the transmission season and the population at risk for the two most important mosquito-borne diseases, dengue and malaria. And we showed that if we are to carry on as a business-as-usual trajectory with temperatures increasing up to 3.7 degrees by the end of the century, we could see an additional 4.7 billion people living in areas at risk of these diseases. Whereas if we are to take concerted climate change mitigation action and really lower our emissions and keep those global temperatures below safe limits, then we can reduce that number by half. Last year, I joined the Barcelona Supercomputing Center, and I established the Global Health Resilience Group within the Earth Sciences Department. And we're an interdisciplinary group of researchers working to try and translate all the global information that we have available at our fingertips from climate models, from satellites, and we're trying to translate this information into useful and actionable information that can be used on the ground by public health decision makers to really try and target interventions in advance. So we're working on a series of different projects. We're focusing on integrating different data types into prediction models to try and inform early warning and response models, particularly for diseases like dengue fever. We also have a project where we're developing foundational digital tools to allow us to harmonize multiple data sources from satellites, from drones, from weather sensors, and really trying to provide robust evidence, particularly for decision makers operating in small islands, in the Amazon rainforest and in highlands. And we're also developing open source tools to understand the compound interactions between extreme events such as droughts and floods, to allow decision makers to be able to predict the probability of infectious diseases several months in advance. And I'm currently the director of the Lancet Countdown in Europe, and we're really trying to tailor the global indicators and provide additional information for decision makers in Europe so we can really understand how climate change is impacting our health in Europe, particularly through a series of indicators on infectious diseases, including dengue, West Nile, leishmaniasis, and also trying to track how the action that we can take to prevent climate change is also incredibly good for our health. So our group has published a series of publications really trying to investigate how indicators such as the El Niño and extreme events can help us understand the probability and the risk of outbreaks particularly for climate-sensitive diseases like dengue and leptospirosis. And we're particularly interested in understanding the links between El Niño and infectious diseases, because when we have El Niño events, we tend to have an improved ability to be able to predict seasonal climate with several months in advance. And this can really give us some early warning triggers that can help public health services be prepared. This is an example of a study that we published looking at the delayed and nonlinear impacts of drought on dengue risk in Brazil. And we found that around 4 months following a drought event and immediately after exceptionally wet conditions, we see an increased risk of dengue outbreaks. And this effect is particularly exacerbated in urban areas, which are also areas that tend to experience water shortages during these extreme events. So these kind of studies help us understand when and where we should be tracking these kind of indicators and to really target those interventions depending on the kind of landscape that we're operating in. And finally, the quality of the models that we develop really depend on the information that feeds into those models. So that's why we're working, thanks to the Wellcome Trust, on a project with partners across the Latin American and the Caribbean to really tailor these toolkits to bring together the robust evidence and integrate different data types from satellites, strategically collected drone and weather sensors, and to combine this with socioeconomic and surveillance information so that we can be ready to build these robust early warning systems and respond to this emerging threat. So if you would like to learn more about our Harmonise project, we recently launched our website. So do please feel free to visit, and I very much look forward to the panel discussion. Thank you.
Great. Thanks so much, Rachel. I was really taken by the photograph of the supercomputer because we are often asked if we have a supercomputer in our basement here. And I can tell you if we did, we would have shown it to you. But our job is actually to bring the people that have that technology and have that knowledge and to really bring them together, as you said, to try to translate this data into meaningful response. So we really appreciate that you're able to bring that to us tonight. So our next speaker is with us virtually. Do we have her up? Yes? Okay. So our next speaker is virtual, and I'm going to introduce Professor Mercy Borba-Cordova. She's a professor in the Faculty of Maritime Engineering and Marine Sciences at Escuela Superior Politécnica del Litoral in Ecuador, and a senior scientist at the Pacific International Center for Disaster Risk Reduction. Ah, there you are. Sorry, I won't stand in front of you. Welcome. She's held many roles as both a researcher and public officer in the areas of environmental and climate change management at the local, regional, and national levels. Her research includes climate and health, climate variability and vector-borne diseases, harmful algae bloom, and socio-ecological vulnerability in urban systems. Mercy is a lead author in the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, the report on mitigation of climate change. And she's also a scientific advisor to the Inter-American Institute for Global Change Research. So welcome, Mercy. Nice to have you.
Thank you very much, Sarah, for your kind introduction. And good evening, everyone. It is my pleasure to be here and try to tell you a little bit about what we are doing in another part of the world. I am very happy that Rachel presented this information about the different models, but now we are going to move to the human aspect about the implementation and how actions concerning climate and health at the local level. I would like to share a collaborative story involving policymakers, health officers, researchers, and the community in the Durán city in Ecuador. Please, next slide. The message that conveyed by the IPCC are reflecting a reality that is unfolding worldwide. The escalation, both the frequency and the intensity of extreme events and climate extreme events is undeniable. Particularly in urban areas, the impact of climate change is exacerbating heat waves and flooding, significantly influencing the epidemiology of climate-sensitive infectious disease. For the cities, this ramification of climate change on the epidemiology have a very profound impact. Next slide, please. I would like to say that reflecting in the experience that we have during the pandemic, we saw like cities emerge as a practical player, no? Practical player in confronting both the COVID-19 and extreme climate events. While the World Health Organization and national government set overarching strategies and response, it was the local government that react in alignment with their unique circumstances and contextual nuances, relying on the surveillance of information available to them. Cities hold a significant responsibility in not just preparing and responding to the multiple health impacts, but also to the extreme events. And they have also the responsibility to the overarching long-term recovery effort. And this is because the cities have the competence related with land use planning, disaster risk management, provision of basic service, health subsistence, and food security, in which cities operate at the forefront. So let's go to the case of the city Ecuador, that's a city that is in the coastal area of Ecuador and is facing multiple hazards from epidemic through very chronic and extreme climate events. Next one, please. Our journey with the city started in 2017 when the municipality reached official participate in a capacity building training focuses on cities' vulnerability. Later, through extensive discussion and numerous meetings, a shared objective emerged, leading to a collaborative journey known as Climate Resilient Initiative for the City of Durán. Under this project, we embarked in a comprehensive multi-hazard risk assessment, placing the city's vulnerability at the core of our analysis, encompassing both climate and health, and through collaborative efforts, working hand in hand in both laboratory settings and on-site, we create geodata especially tailored for the city, complemented by integration of health information provided by the Minister of Environment. Next one, please. With this information, we mapping exposure, sensitivity, and adapted capacity to the hazard at the city level that facilitate to identify where are the vulnerable population and why are the root causes. This comprehensive analysis enables the design and implementation of a specific measure and intervention that aim to reduce the vulnerability and enhance the resilience. So we were looking at physical environment, social and health impact, but also at the governance between the communities and the municipality and the different stakeholders. Next one, please. From our processes, key insights have emerged. First, intersectoral collaboration is paramount to develop integrative intervention, especially concerning public health prevention measures, such as vector control, epidemiological diagnosis, and community engagement in monitoring efforts. Additionally, community empowerment stands as a critical enable mobilization during climate and health crises, like infectious disease outbreak. And finally, significant variance exists. First, the lack of a mandate and a political will hinders intersectoral collaboration among public health, climate risk management, and local government. Next one, please. But it was very interesting that we have during the process a participatory process with the community. And with that, we identify prioritized action for local implementation, and several key findings emerged. City officers and our scientific team show a preference for technical solutions, particularly in early warning system for multi-hazard or nature-based solutions. But the initial focus was in the flood, and subsequently the system was selected, was designed and implemented within the city that is currently in process of implementation. But on the other hand, the community primary priority lies in social empowerment, focuses in the city violence, water provision, and human health. In response to the community needs, efforts are underway to develop an anticipatory action aimed at mobilizing the community to act within the alert of a warning window. These actions are very critical to mitigate the adverse impact on livelihood, human health, and property. Next one, please. My final remarks. Certainly, based in our work with cities, these conclusions have emerged. First, achieving integration and interdisciplinary collaboration among stakeholders demands time, a clear mandate, a robust political will, and effective leadership. These are essential elements for successful executive integrated intervention. Also, there is an urgent need for a substantial effort in capacity building across multiple stakeholders. This includes integrating health and climate data, developing a comprehensive early warning system, enhancing surveillance capability, and empowering communities to take broad action. And emphasize the importance of science translation and effective risk communication is paramount. Bridging diverse perspectives among stakeholders necessitates clear, concise communication strategies. Overcoming this potential misinterpretation and misunderstanding among stakeholders is vital in ensuring a cohesive and united approach to address the complex interaction of infectious disease and climate. Thank you very much, and I'm looking forward to our discussion time. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mercy, and I think really importantly, highlighting the implications of these climate events on the individuals and the necessity for how do we translate this data down to the individual level because it has such a direct impact on their lives, as well as how do we put the communities at the center of that discussion and also gain the leadership and political will that we need to translate that information. So really appreciate your intervention and look forward to further questions on the panel. And now, happy to introduce our third speaker today, and this is John Silito. He's the Director of Genomic Surveillance Unit at the Wellcome Sanger Institute, which delivers products, tools, and services that empower public health partners to add genomic information to decision-making. John joined Wellcome Sanger in 2018 to help the Institute deliver its vision of making genomic surveillance accessible worldwide. And during the COVID-19 pandemic, his team built and led the UK's national COVID-19 surveillance operation, which at its peak was able to handle over 300,000 samples per week and provide analytical data for public health decision-making. Previously, John held senior leadership roles in manufacturing, engineering, defense, health, research, and outsourced services, so he's been a busy guy. And he is passionate about translating technological innovation to products that can inform real-world decision-making. Welcome, John.
Thank you, Sarah, and thank you, everybody, and good evening. You might have guessed from that very kind introduction that my background is in engineering rather than in research. And many of you may know of the Wellcome Sanger Institute, but our unit, the Genomic Surveillance Unit, is all about working with partners around the world to support getting genomic surveillance into public health decision-making. A lot of that is about building the tools, building the systems that are affordable and operating at the appropriate level and scale. So it's very much about how do you translate it. So I'm very grateful to be given this opportunity to talk about the challenges of climate on surveillance and on health. And I'm guessing as a starting point, it's pretty fair for me to assume that we're all happy with the assumption that climate change is happening and that we want to understand its impact to improve our ability to support health interventions going forward. So I wanted to start with, operationally, what do we see as some of the challenges? What do we see as some of the things that with a solutioning mindset might we have to do to move this problem forward? And Rachel already talked about the importance of whole system. This is a complex system. Lots of things are interacting together. And so trying to understand those different interactions is going to be critical to any modelling going forward. And from a lot of the situations and partners we work with around the world, it's not just climate, it is social, it is economic, it is all those other changes. And of course, they all interfere with each other as well, just to add some complexity to this challenge. But at the heart of where we are focused is around generating data. Because without data, how can you measure, how can you monitor, how can you even contemplate controlling a system, trying to control human health, trying to improve human health going forward? But actually, to do that is not just about any old data, it's about understanding and collecting the data for the right purposes. And that has political messages to it on the ground, and it absolutely gets involved in day-to-day operations. And people need to feel safe around the data that we are collecting around surveillance to be able to ask the right questions. And the purpose of the data, I think, can really be boiled down to things that enable us to respond to and recover from both short-term climate-delivered shocks and long-term impact from climate change. So I'd like to talk about two examples of some of the work that our partners have been doing. The first following on from the topic of vector-borne disease. I think we all agree, and I think we've heard a lot of evidence around vector-borne disease, that with the change of climate, we're seeing wider transmission ranges. Actually, working with this group of this impressive group of collaborators across Africa, we've seen already this year new species in areas that they have historically not been in. Now, the challenge we have is we don't know if they've always been there or whether they are new to there because the historic data is not strong enough to provide the evidence in those spaces. But what we're also seeing is extended periods of transmission through the longer summers, and we're also seeing wet seasons. But we're also starting to see malaria in communities where no interventions and practices are in place. Similarly, mosquitoes are also evolving. You might notice on our list of, it's difficult to see, but the list of mosquito species, you'll see some there without names. And it's been the process of genomic surveillance that is identifying potential new species, which we don't understand the behaviors of. And that is going to be critical for us to understand the impact on health going forward. Mosquitoes are incredibly genetically diverse, and as a result are incredibly good at adapting. And so continued monitoring is essential for us to understand their ongoing impact into climate and climate change. The second project I would like to talk about is actually starting in next year and will be led by Dr. Hanifi at ICDDRB in Bangladesh. This project is based on Dr. Hanifi's previous work, and where he has demonstrated the impact on human health across a region of Bangladesh, and that as you look and observe the population, as you move into higher temperature, and into regions that are impacted by flooding, human health declines. Now, rising temperatures, increased flooding and sea flooding are all symptoms of climate change. Now, that piece of work has demonstrated a correlation between those phenomena. This next piece of work is very much focused about trying to understand what are the drivers behind this. adding more data sets to get to this already rich public health data set is now adding genomic surveillance data, both of the environment, but also of the human microbiome. Now, for those of you not involved in this space, human microbiome is a great marker of human health and the richness of the human microbiome. So what we're hoping to do over the next 3 years through this open collaborative data set is start to understand some of the drivers behind this phenomenon that we're seeing, and hopefully that may lead to better interventions in the future going forward. But as other colleagues have already said, this is all about connecting multiple data sets together. It is about putting them into open environments in pretty much real time, where others can see the data, collaborate with the data, interact with the data. I think gone are the years where, you know, research sits on data for 6 years before it becomes publicly available. The last piece I just wanted to raise was that all of this only works through equitable collaboration. This is absolutely critical to everything we want to do. Everything that we are focused on is driven by public health needs, and that has to be led in regions and it has to be led in countries. And this is all about, you know, standing those things up and supporting those things to happen. But we have to take a global approach to this problem. It is too big, it is too complicated for us each to do our own thing without coming together. And a great example of the work of this is work led by Tullio in terms of the climate piece, in terms of collaborations and looking at how, you know, just discussing how different countries are experiencing impact. And I know there's a lot of other great collaborations in this space. So in conclusion, where are we now? Well, we know the disease profile is changing. And so what we used to know, we cannot rely on. We still have lots of blind spots, both in diseases and in geographies. And if we're hoping to solve this problem, those blind spots need to be overcome. So where do we need to get to? We have to evolve and enhance surveillance. Now, we have something that we are trying to model, but we cannot understand without data, particularly in an environment that is constantly changing. But we can only achieve this through equitable co-creation, through regional and country leadership, but with a global approach. And I think through working together and through the power of IPSM, that can be achieved. Thank you all very much. Look forward to the discussion.
Great. Thank you so much, Sean. And I know the first conversations that we had together when we were talking about genomic surveillance and how do you build new innovation and new data and new technologies into these surveillance systems, and the importance of looking at this in real time, in real life, that it's not an academic exercise. It has clear impact on how we address the problems and on the communities that we serve. So really appreciate that. And maybe a note, too, that all of the speakers here talked about the importance of vector-borne diseases, which is natural to this conversation. And, you know, as we recognize that at COP28, there is a full health day, actually vector-borne diseases are not on the agenda there. So hopefully we are here able to contribute a little bit more to that discussion. So with that, I want to again thank our speakers, and we're going to go to a few video messages from people that were not able to be with us in person. And first we have from WHO, we have Dr. Vanessa Carey, who is the WHO Special Envoy for Climate Change and Health. Then we're going to go to Mozambique. For the National Institute of Health, we have Dr. Eduardo Gudo, who's the Director General there, as well as his colleague, Tatiana Marfu, who is the coordinator of the National Climate and Health Observatory in Mozambique. And then finally, from the Chinese Center for Disease Control and Prevention, we have Dr. Qiyang Liu, I'm going to get that right, who is the chief expert on vector control and the chief scientist for health and climate. So please enjoy our video.
Ladies and gentlemen, colleagues, as we gather today, communities around the globe are being threatened by climate change. Wildfires in Maui, Canada, in Europe and around the world, record-breaking heat, drought in the Horn of Africa, and flooding in Libya. In fact, up to 3.3 billion people globally, almost half the world's population, are highly vulnerable to the threats of climate change. And collectively, we face an unknown future, defined by increased extreme weather. Decades of inaction have led us to this moment. Rising greenhouse gas emissions are warming our planet, accelerating changes in our environment, and harming our global biodiversity. We are failing to meet the Paris Agreement goals to limit warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius. Yet, we should not be tracking our progress in degrees Celsius, but in lives saved. Because each of these frequently driven climate events leaves us with a long tail of death, devastation, and health complications in its wake. We must take a health-centered approach to climate change. And it starts by urgently reducing the greenhouse gases which are killing us daily. And it will require investing in strong and resilient health systems, backed by a well-resourced health workforce, to ensure that we are adapting and building resilience so that we can mitigate the day-to-day impact of climate on people's lives, build resilience to new shocks, and accrue savings in the long term. These bold investments are our ability to do primary care, to work towards universal health care, to eliminate the crushing burdens of disease which hold so much of the world back. These same investments which can address the coming disease can also help us deal with other pandemics, of maternal mortality, of mental health, of infectious disease, of trauma, of non-communicable diseases, all of which are destroying so many lives today.
Let me start by highlighting that Mozambique is among the countries more affected and vulnerable to extreme climate events worldwide. Indeed, over the last few years, the country has been repeatedly hit by severe storms and cyclones, leading to mass destruction of infrastructure, loss of life, disruption in provision of essential health services, triggering massive cholera outbreaks, increasing of malaria cases, and causing important decline in several health indicators. To support the country building a climate-resilient health system, our institute has been working on three main components. First, establishment of Climate and Health Observatory as a platform of epidemiological intelligence for climate and health. Second, conducting, updating vulnerability and assessment. And third, development of Health National Adaptation Plan, which is being finalized, and we hope to get country approval by mid next year. My colleague Tatiana Maruf will then provide more details on our work.
We have been working since 2016 to provide the evidence on the understanding of the relations between climate and health that involves not only the risks and the impacts on climate-sensitive diseases. I would like to share an example of one of our activities that we have been involved since 2018 in collaboration with the National Institute of Meteorology, in which, using the meteorological forecasts, we have been able to develop a model using time series of epidemiological data to actually predict the probability of an outbreak of malaria and diarrheal diseases. In the past years, we have been evaluating our performance in our models and are happy to share that we came up with a prediction precision of 90% when compared to what we have observed during the rainy season.
Climate change brings greater challenges for us when confronting climate-sensitive infectious diseases, especially for vector-borne diseases. In China, based on our vector surveillance program, we found significant change of spatial distribution of mosquito vectors. This is especially evident in our studies on dengue. About 40 years ago, local transmission of dengue only occurred in one or two tropical provinces in south of China. Due to climate change, we are now seeing local transmission of dengue in more and more provinces. Climate change is posing greater risks on health for people in China, and there is a rapidly narrowing window of opportunities to enable climate-resilient development. China has made the commitment to achieve peak carbon emission by 2030 and carbon neutral by 2060. This presents us a huge opportunity to confront climate change, and we need to ensure health remains as an integral part of these efforts to strive for people, planet, and prosperity. It is not an easy task, and the time to act is now.
Our response to this moment is a huge opportunity to do things differently. And it begins with bold and truly courageous leadership at every level, from politicians to policymakers to each of you in this room, to make unprecedented decisions and to be willing to change the status quo. We have an opportunity to revise what we value, to put health and well-being at the forefront of our decision-making. We must take ambitious, comprehensive, long-term, and equitable path forward, one vested in planetary and human health, and which addresses climate change ambitiously and pragmatically. Each and every one of you in this room has the power to enact improvements that we need to see. It's time for action.
Great, thanks so much. You know, a note to, hearing Dr. Eduardo from Mozambique speak, I can attest the last 2 meetings I have been in with him, he has had to leave early for climate-induced events and outbreaks to rush home actually to lead them from his country. So he's a living example of, has everybody said, the speed and importance that we really need to take to address this, as well as the collaborations, which I really appreciate everybody highlighted. And that's across sectors, it's across vectors, it's across technologies, it's across partners that didn't necessarily always work together, just like the groups here in this room tonight have likely not always worked together in these areas, and how do we better foster that? So we're going to now go into the panel, and so I'd like to introduce my colleague, Dr. Oliver Morgan, who's the director here for Pandemic and Epidemic Intelligence Systems. And as we do that, I'm going to remind you that you are able to put your questions in through the QR code on your flyer, as well as through the system online. So, Oliver, please.
Great. Well, thanks very much, and good evening to everybody. It's a pleasure for me to be able to chair the panel session. I think Mercy is going to join us online, and we've got Rachel and John here with me on stage. And please send in your questions. They'll come to me on my phone, and I'll pick them up. But I'll start with a couple of questions from my side to get the conversation going. And maybe, Rachel, if I can turn to you first. In your presentation, you mentioned a project called Harmonize, using Earth observation data, which is something that actually has been used before or used frequently for humanitarian responses and humanitarian emergencies. But can you talk a little bit more about how you're using Earth observation data for your work around climate and health?
Yeah, so we're trying to use this data so we can understand how the climate and the environment have been changing in the last decades, and how this is linked to changes in epidemiological situation in many countries, because many of these disease patterns have been disrupted by either changing in the climatic suitability or in the way that people are changing use of the land. We're seeing deforestation is disrupting patterns of malaria, for example, And the way the climate interacts with the landscape is also very important. We recently published a study where we were looking at the way the resurgence of malaria in mining communities in Venezuela, for example, and these disrupted landscapes were a lot more sensitive to changes in the climate in terms of malaria transmission than the forest that had been left without so much disruption. So we try and make use of this climatic information from gridded products or from satellites, and we're also collecting more detailed information from drones, because particularly in tropical areas, often the satellite images can be disrupted by cloud cover, so we can try and have a more fine-scale understanding of what's really going on the ground to help local decision makers understand how they can help protect the local communities.
Great, thanks, Rachel. And maybe just a short follow-up question to that. You say you're hosted or you're based at the Barcelona Supercomputing Center, which maybe suggests that you actually need quite a lot of computing power to manage all of these Earth observation data. Can you just very briefly mention, are these data accessible? Is it easy to work with, challenging to work with? Do you need a supercomputer to use Earth observation data?
Well, the supercomputer allows us to process large quantities of information very quickly, and this provides us with access to very detailed, fine-scale information about the climate. Could be at the hourly level over centuries, and also projecting to the end of the century. So this allows us to incorporate simulations of the climate into our health decision systems. But we're really working to develop digital solutions that can be applied in low resource settings, so that users don't have to rely on supercomputing power, and that we can try and develop the most sort of parsimonious and usable tools that can be applied in a local context as well.
That's great. Thanks very much, Rachel. Mercy, I hope you can hear me okay?
Yes, I can hear you well.
Great, thank you so much. Mercy, thank you so much for your presentation, in which you gave us a really great example of some very practical local actions that can be taken. I'd be very interested to hear a little bit more about how some of that local action can be implemented in many different cities as well. So it seems a very intensive effort to work with local communities and local government to implement early warning surveillance for climate and health-related events. How do we scale that up and do that if maybe in every city that's around the world that's needed?
Yeah, thank you very much for your question. And actually, it's a very challenging effort. One of the things that I believe if the cities want to do, have to do through partnership. And the partnership have to be related with local academia and local researchers, because this endeavor, it really have to be made with the science that coming from the academic and research center, but the decision maker really have to be totally convinced, the will to try to include that in their planning, because they will use the resource of the city, like the officers, like the people that is collecting data, to integrate in just one platform, that trying to integrate that information, but not just for science, but also for intervention, to know where it's going to be the next climate hazard, not all because of the condition of the soil or condition of the some drainage system, but also knowing the vulnerability that is there, and they need to prepare some intervention. So it's feasible? Yes, it's feasible if there is the will, there is the possibility to engage in partnership, and also to try to include another partner, because this is very demanding in efforts and resource. And believe in our region, especially, there is another partner, like a private sector, that is still not involved in issues of climate and health. So I believe this is an important call to integrate not just institutions, public institutions, research academic, and the community. And it's very interesting that community is totally interested, totally willing to do the same. So I believe, yes, we need a lot of effort, but most important, the will of all the stakeholders to participate.
Great, thanks so much, Mercy. And I was very interested to also know whether there are already existing networks of, I don't know, government officials who manage city governments with which we can work to do some of this preparedness work. Are there already networks of between cities around the world that can share their experiences?
Absolutely. I think this is a great opportunity to see that there is a movement, different kind of cities to try to go to work in climate, to work in risk management, to work in nature-based solutions. So this is an important additional topic because to say you the truth, I don't see still the human health in all the cities like a very deeply involved. It's mostly because of the infrastructure, it's mostly because of the urban planning, but at the end of that, human health is there. Human health is the most important thing that is related with this urban planning. So these networks are in every part of the region and are very important. We can work with that, but also I believe there is a lot of thousands of cities, intermediate cities. This is intermediate cities that probably don't have this political. They are not very interesting for the world to see it, but we are many out of there. So probably that's important also to integrate this is intermediate cities that still need more capacity to do to provide their vision, what they want to do, but because they also want to do the thing, but they really need to do also this engagement in different networks that will be really important to try to invest in their own cities.
Great, thank you so much, Mercy. Let me turn to John here up on stage and touch on an aspect that you mentioned a few times, which is around equity and the importance you placed on having data to understand the challenges, track solutions, and I guess adapt responses. But what happens when we work in parts of the world where there are no data, and how do we ensure that our focus is equitable even in places where data is lacking or maybe insufficient?
Yeah, I mean, that is a huge challenge, and it is an important problem that we have to solve going forward. And I think that, you know, part of the challenge in terms of establishing this infrastructure is, one is cost. One is about ensuring that a lot of the things we talk about can be done incredibly cost effectively. A second is making it really relevant to local population and to local areas. You know, there is never enough money to prioritize things. And so as a result, if the thing that we're talking about is not relevant locally, then it is never going to be adopted. It is never going to become a priority. And the third component to that is a very open approach to transfer of knowledge, of capacity, and on all of that work that is required to build a sustainable local infrastructure as well. I think many of us have seen, you know, a lot of challenges in this space where a lot of the work initially started as research projects. Of course, by their very nature, they have start-stop funding. They, you know, and actually, what we're trying to do is have something that is embedded into our ecosystem, and so therefore they have to have that local relevance to get that funding, but it has to become a local solution. There are many steps on that journey, and that's working with local or regional partners to get onto that journey. But actually, you know, the ultimate goal has to be local solutions and local led. But therefore, it's got to be able to address local problems, not just regional and global problems as well. And we just have to take it in steps. You know, we're not going to transform everything overnight, but every step we move forward, you know, is one more on the journey that we've got to do. So, but I think it is a long game. It is a long journey.
Great. Thanks very much, John. Maybe I'll turn to a few of the questions submitted by the audience, and I have a few of them here. I'll try and paraphrase them a little bit. A question I think I might tend towards a bit Rachel, but I'll open it for all the panelists. A question around modeling and the importance of modeling to understand the complexity of diseases. And has there ever been an assessment of how the models perform in relation to informing policymakers? I guess, has there been an evaluation about whether modeling of climate and health related events have actually had positive and, well, let's say just positive impacts on policy decisions?
I think as much as possible, these climate and health modelling initiatives need to be developed with the policymakers and with the stakeholders to ensure that they really are policy relevant and designed to address those questions. I would say that many of the sort of published models out there have been sort of prototypes or demonstrations of how this could work in practice, but often there's not that sustained investment in having these operational solutions. So I think we really need to move towards a situation where we can really make sure these research endeavours are put into practice and can serve the policymakers. But it becomes very difficult to evaluate how effective they are, particularly if they are good models and they predict correctly, because if action is taken upon those predictions, then it can be quite challenging to find the best strategy to see how well it's actually potentially prevented an outbreak from happening.
Thanks, Rachel. Any other thoughts from either Mercy or John?
I would like to add that it's very critical at the moment that is developing the modeling for every, intervention, a forecast, a seasonal forecast, for instance. It's really critical to get involved with the stakeholder, the policymakers. The policymakers have, access to the data, but also have access information to the intervention that are already through the Ministry of Health or through the different departments, what there is in the territory. If you don't have that, it's going to be very, very difficult to evaluate because they don't know exactly what are the actions that the different departments, health department or social department, are working on the territory. So my final thought is that we have to talk to the decision maker. And again, I totally believe that it will be really important to have like a mandate to try to work climate and health and cities, because the local actions are developed there. But also, if we really don't have any kind of institutional arrangement between the different sectors, it's going to be very difficult. Everybody's so busy trying to attend the health issue, the city issue, the politics that every place have. So if we have some mandate and some institutional clear arrangement, probably that will be the first step.
Fantastic, Mercy. John, were you going to come in, or shall I? I'll move on to. Well, actually, I'm going to maybe just have an extension to your comments, Mercy, based on a question that came online, which is about what are the realities and challenges of translating some of the research findings into practical action and policy, and how does that happen with the engagement of the relevant ministries or local government authorities, and how do they kind of consume and process some of those research outputs and turn them into practical actions? Maybe if you might have a start with that, Mercy, and then I'll see if John and Rachel also have some views on that.
Thank you. Well, I have been in both sides of the coin. I have been a decision maker working for the Ministry of Environment, also at the city level, and I have been also as a researcher. When I have been in the area as a decision maker, the problem that we have is the minimal amount of data. It was, to me, so difficult as a training as a scientist to try to make some decision, but with very limited information. But after some time of practice, you decide that you have to make a decision as soon as you can with the limited information and with the advice of the people, of the experts that know what happened in the case, for instance, of the climate and in the case of vector-borne disease. Yeah. So in that case, I believe it is very relevant. The translation have to try to be on the shoes of the other side. What is important for the decision maker? For the decision maker, it's important to have an impact on the social, on the well-being of the population, and have to be very fast, efficient. In the case of the scientists, they can take some time and they want some publication. They want to define like a very complex model that will be very nice to explore. But we have to go for very efficient tools that can be implemented and show like a specific result where I can have some specific intervention that I can measure and I define with the model, oh, okay, I can measure this indicator, and that's the information that I give you. When we talk with the city, we decide to give some specific protocols, some specific mapping, some specific tools that they can use for their planning. So that's the kind of thing that I believe we have to find a common ground where the decision makers, they have some specific benefits that they can use in the daily operation, and they can invest or reduce the money that invest in the resource of the equipment, whatever they will be doing, because they're looking for efficiency and impact.
Great, thanks. Any thoughts from John or Rachel about this translational challenge?
Absolutely, yes. I think it's a great point, and I totally agree with the translational challenge. I mean, I think the first point is that I think the big challenge of information being acted on in public health is that we're going from something that is a statistical probability to something that is binary. That in public health you either do or do not do something. And that is a big step, and therefore, as you say, having sufficient data to make that case on is really important. I think at an operational level, the whole piece about translation is almost that's the stage where magic happens, and it happens overnight, doesn't it? You know, and actually it doesn't. There's a huge amount of work that has to go into taking something from a concept or a proof of concept to a prototype to something that can be rolled out and scaled. And often those steps are massively overlooked. And speaking very personally, it's an area where actually funding is very difficult within that space, because it's not the cool discovery research on one side, it's not operational government funding on the other. And typically in other sectors, that gap's filled by the private sector of product development and those spaces. But that isn't operating in this space. So actually translation, I think, is a huge for us in what we do, both in terms of recognizing it is a massive step and a massive activity, but it is also a big question about where does that funding come from.
Rachel, I'm sure you have some perspectives on the research to action steps.
Yeah, I think it's really crucial that there's this constant dialogue between decision makers and researchers, so it's not just a sort of one-way relationship, but there's really this exchange of knowledge, and that the researchers need to understand the environment in which the decision makers are operating, not just asking them what they need, but understanding exactly what they do in their day-to-day, and trying to provide some sort of solutions that's an improvement to current practice, and really making sure that in terms of modelling, that these model outputs are really aligned with the decision-making processes, and using the thresholds that are relevant to the local setting, and to ensure that any kind of early warnings really can be translated into early action, and those actions have to be defined by the local decision makers in their own context.
Great, thanks, Rachel. Maybe if you don't mind, I'll direct the next question to you, which is a very interesting question around the fact that a lot of the effects of climate on health are not equally distributed across the population, and that we have vulnerable groups in our population who are more adversely affected by climate-driven factors. How do we take that into account when we're thinking about either estimating impacts or, I guess, again, translating those estimates into action?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's really important, trying to understand the underlying inequalities and where possible being able to incorporate those inequalities into the modelling efforts so we can really understand how different vulnerable populations in the community are impacted by these extreme climatic events and the disease outcomes. So we really, to be able to do this, we need to be able to have access to these fine-scale data sets to really dig into the mechanisms that, so we can understand how climate change is disproportionately affecting different groups.
Great, thanks, Mercy. I'm sure this features heavily in the work that you do at the local level. How does that actually work out in practice on the ground?
Yeah, I may say that cities are very interested in mapping vulnerability. When we call for this kind of training, we have many municipalities trying to understand how they can do, because they know that if they understand that, that will be kind of easier to try to reach some communities or to develop some specific program with a specific needs. So I believe the part of the vulnerability is critical and is at play at the front of any kind of climate impact risk assessment, because the needs of, for instance, of the elder population, of the children, or the people with some specific chronic disease, they are critical to know in order to where I can do my first intervention. And that's going to be part of the model, probably could be a complemented part, because we have to find a way to integrate different systems and the part of the social vulnerability and the part of what are these determinants of health is very critical when we want to do, not just the modeling, but also the application of the model to know where is a high priority to apply, to understand where is the most important area that we need to find out. So vulnerability is important. It's important and it's time consuming. We need very refined data. But the interesting thing is the city, they have it. The problem with the city is sometimes they don't know how to manage the data. And that's the collaboration with the research of academic institutions. They really can help in that to develop with, a base information that they can use for not just for research, but also for the daily operation of the city.
Thanks so much, Mercy. Let me change the theme of the conversation just a little bit and head over to John about a question that's come through, submitted by one of the audience members around the opportunities that there are that we have with newer technologies. Specifically around data science technologies and artificial intelligence type technologies. You mentioned some of the challenges that we have about taking things from concepts through to scale. What are some of the opportunities that we have?
So I think that there's certainly we're involved with a number of opportunities. Certainly looking at AI and various algorithms. I think there's a lot of that's still very much in its early stages, and without sounding a little bit like a broken record, I apologize. Some of the problems we've got with these models at the moment is to feed them enough data. So again, they're very good at looking retrospectively. They're great when you apply it to the pandemic, where you've got very large historic data sets. We've got algorithms that have been built working in partnership with University of Florida, for example, looking at early prediction of lineages of threat from the COVID data. We're applying it to data that's currently being generated, but it's such small amounts of data, it's almost impossible to determine anything from it. So I think there's huge amounts of excitement about these tools that are there. But again, I think back to your much earlier question about retrospective versus forward-looking predictions, then we still need those data feeds to keep flowing. So apologies to go back to data and data again, Oliver, on that. But yes, lots of exciting things there, but they'll only move forward with the data.
Great, thanks, John. And Rachel, maybe you want to have a go at that question too, and maybe touch on some of the kind of research priorities also in this space. And I think, yes, we can always use more data, but there's also a lot of data that currently exists. How do you see some of the research priorities and applications of technologies as well?
Yeah, in our case, we've been using these AI algorithms, for example, to try and downscale this coarser scale information that we can obtain from climate models and satellites using ground truth data, so we can really understand, for example, can these climatic models replicate these altitudinal gradients that we see in temperature, and we're doing that by installing, for example, weather sensors along either urban to rural gradients or altitudinal gradients, so we can develop these algorithms to improve the way these global products can actually serve local decision making. We've also been experimenting with machine learning approaches, as John mentioned, to try and crunch these very large historical data sets and try and understand the patterns between different Earth observation data sets and disease surveillance data, particularly for dengue. So we're certainly seeing some positive movements in that direction. In terms of research priorities, I think really trying to make use of the many different modelling approaches that are out there, and moving more towards a multi-model approach so we can really learn from these different modelling approaches and the benefits that each one of those brings to predicting different aspects of the environment disease relationships, and really trying to develop more of an integrated approach and make the most of non-traditional data streams as well, including things like citizen science or active surveillance, in particular hotspots, and trying to bring together all these different data streams, as well as human mobility data, which is incredibly important for disease transmission as well.
Mm-hmm. Fantastic. Well, we're coming to the end of the panel session, but I want us to kind of finish with just a few reflections from each of the panelists. And in COP28, there was the first Climate and Health Declaration, which was signed by 123 countries, and we heard that a lot of the focus on the impacts of climate have been either on impacts on infrastructure or impacts on the economy or on our economies, and now obviously the impact on health is front and center. How can we use the opportunity of looking at climate through a health lens to drive climate policy to help contribute to alleviating some of the climate change challenges ahead? Maybe Mercy, I might turn that question to you to begin with, and then over to John and Rachel.
I believe it is really important to see the impact of climate is producing in the human health. And that is not just life loss, but also the economic impact that coming because of the people cannot work or the people that go to hospital. And that really is a burden for the economy of the local and the national government. So I believe this probably will be a call for action, no? A call for action, but also the other part that is like the extreme events are hitting almost everywhere, no? And almost every country is vulnerable. So this call for action have to be into, how to reduce the impact of that extreme event, and human health is at the center of that. So probably that's one of the main messages that we have to carry, but I will add something else. We know that to do all this kind of thing, we need a lot of resource. We need a lot of technology. We need also a lot of capacity building. So I believe on the hand that we want to go into direction on climate health, have to be also with the capacity building to be transferred to different, countries, cities, and local government. They will need to move in that direction because it's not available everywhere. So we need to work in capacity building to be fair, to be, everybody can do it and nobody have to be, behind. Everybody have to be moving forward.
Great. Thanks so much, Mercy. John, over to you.
So I think there's two things I'd like to raise on that. One I think is that we have to continue with the work that everyone in the room and online are doing at the moment in time, showing the connections and demonstrating the impact. I think that is really, really important. And, then feeding the predictive models, and rolling those forwards. There's a lot of evidence I think we still have to produce in this space. And I think that's a key part. I think the other thing that then with that evidence we have to do is then turn it back into an economic model as well. Because there is the whole health impact and looking at that from a societal perspective. But actually this also has a massive economic perspective. And I'm sorry if I'm sounding a little brutal, but sometimes this is the way we have to communicate these messages, particularly to governments and politicians. And we look at a lot of the vector-borne diseases we've been discussing today, and actually even if we reflect back to the pandemic, if we take some of the latter strains of COVID, what were governments worried about? They were worried actually about the ability to maintain national infrastructure, critical national infrastructure, not about mortality rates, but about having enough workforce to maintain critical national infrastructures and the economic impacts of that and the economic impacts that we're seeing at the moment in time. So I do think we have to turn it back into their game as well, but we need this other work to continue.
Rachel, final reflections from you.
Well, healthy people really depend on a healthy planet, so we can't keep burning fossil fuels, we can't keep destroying the rainforest. We really need a just transition and to place health and justice at the heart of climate action and recognise that any action we take to mitigate climate change is very good for our health in terms of clean air, more livable cities and more active lifestyles. So we just really need to take the action and start now.
Great. Well, thank you very much. Let me thank the three panelists. Thanks, Mercy, John, Rachel. And we'll wrap up the panel session, and I'm going to hand over to Chikwe for some concluding comments. So quick round of applause for our panelists. Thank you very much.
So thanks a lot. That was really, really interesting. Very hard topic, I'm sure. We're all thinking how much of this is feasible, what can we do ourselves other than advocate, but there's a lot we can do, and I think some of those themes came out. Really excited to have three of you here. John, thanks a lot. Rachel, thanks for coming. And Mercy, I hope you can still hear me. Thank you so much for joining us from Ecuador. We'll do a pop quiz, I hope you heard after this, on how much we all know about Ecuador. No, but really, we try to bring in diverse voices into the hub so that we don't end up being an echo chamber just speaking to ourselves from voices that we know. But this has been a really, really great conversation, from the really challenging data on the changes of temperatures around the world, Rachel, that you presented, and just how big the impact is, and its impact on so-called climate-sensitive diseases. I think almost every disease is climate-sensitive, is either directly or indirectly. So we'll have a lot to think about there. So thanks a lot. Thanks, Mercy, for really bringing this down to the impact on local communities. I'll be looking up your small city of Duran, and in addition to the impact of climate, hope to come and see it ourselves soon. But really, I think your local perspectives are really great and very important for us to think about how to influence policy at the local level. And thanks, John, always for your insights challenging complexity when you showed the map on data from some countries across West Africa. I noticed a country with 200 million people with very little data coming from it. So big problem in a big country. So, but anyway, listen, thanks a lot, colleagues. This has been a fascinating conversation, insights. I'm sure we'll have a lot to think about, especially over the drinks at the back of the room, but hopefully also beyond this evening. This is our last speaker series for this year. Thank you so much for joining us in these conversations over the last 6 events, and look forward to hosting you again in the new year. Thanks, Beate, for collaborating with us and all our other colleagues around from the various institutions in Berlin for joining, for our colleagues from Geneva, everyone joining us. Please welcome to the reception and enjoy, make new friends, and new colleagues, and let's think about some of the tough conversations we've had, but also have a great end to what has been a very busy year, I'm sure, for all of you and for all of us. But thank you very much.